At the center of it all, we're talking about people. At the center of it all, we're talking about political parties, because who does the negotiation with who? It's usually, and it's always, political parties. Secondly, within those political parties also, there has to be an understanding that there's an ideology, which we sometimes seem to want to push to the back, and yet the fact of the matter is that at the center of it all, whether you go to the US, you go to UK, or go to any other country, at the center it is political parties. Same thing applies here in the African continent. And within the political parties, there's also individuals. And again, many a times we tend to want to remove that, or if we don't remove that, we make that the center of our discussion. You have party interests, and sometimes those party interests go in the right direction in assisting the facilitation or the negotiations, but sometimes they go completely to the opposite direction. And you then have to deal with, how do you deal with that situation? How do you even begin to understand, first and foremost, those political parties that are involved? Their background, their history. That is very important in as far as facilitation and negotiation is concerned. If you lose that point, you'll never be able to get anywhere, because you'll just be swimming in the dark. And by the way, also within the political parties, you have inter-party challenges. That is also very important in any negotiations or any facilitation. We always have to keep that in mind. Now, with the interest of individuals within political parties, you also need to be aware, what are these interests? Are they interests that are meant to take the process, the broader process forward, or are they interests that are meant to serve an individual? And these are the challenges in the African continent, and they have very little to do with just Zimbabwe alone. This is what you will find whether you go to Botswana or Lesotho or Swaziland or Cote d'Ivoire or Gabon or any other place. The external interests are of interest to us, because at the end of the day, it's one thing to come into a room and sit with all the negotiators and agree with certain things, and another for the negotiators or the parties concerned to leave the room and go out there and talk to their external people who have an interest, and the minute you come back again, it's like the first time you were having a discussion, nothing ever happened. And this is a fact. And this I experienced particularly when we were dealing with the situation in the DRC. We took the process very far, but we knew, as we were sitting in Sun City for more than 50 days, 54 days I think it was, we knew all the time that when we thought we now have it in the bag, they would come back and all these things will come flocking out of their heads, stopping the process where we thought now we're almost done and we'll have to go right back. Jacob Zuma, it's simple. He's been given a responsibility to facilitate the global political agreement, the implementation of the global political agreement, the development of a roadmap to election, and ensuring that Zimbabwe ultimately takes its place in the African continent, in all the structures of the African continent, takes its place without feeling uncomfortable wherever they go. But more than anything else, it's about ensuring that the people of Zimbabwe who deserve better, they finally go to the elections and elect the people that they want to elect. It's not for the facilitator to push people into this direction or that direction. That's the responsibility of the different political parties on the ground. That's the responsibility of all formations on the ground, because as I have said earlier on, that the importance of different formations in Zimbabwe reminds us also in South Africa of the importance of different formations, whether it's NGOs, whether it's churches. In any negotiation, there's always at the end an agreement. The challenge that we always have, particularly in the continent, is parties sticking to the agreement, implementing the things that they all agreed upon. And that's one of the biggest challenges for any facilitator, because one minute one thing is implemented, the next one is not implemented, and again the different interests which I spoke about earlier come to play as we are trying to make sure that these agreements are implemented. And in the context of Zimbabwe, there is nothing else that is anywhere else except the global political agreement. Now, I've just dealt roughly with all those things which we think are very important in any negotiations. Lastly, which we believe, particularly from a South African perspective, is that in the process of negotiations, people, just ordinary people who are not in the process, are very important. It is for this reason that we believe the different political parties, the parliamentarians, the different structures that are there are important. It is for that reason that as a facilitation team, we started opening up and expanding our discussion with other formations which are outside of the global political agreement, because we believe that we can only be enriched also by listening to people. At the same time, it's very difficult because your role is to see to the implementation of a global political agreement. So when you start going out and listening to other people, you know even then that you are going to be pulled into different directions. The best that they can in as far as, one, the implementation of the global political agreement is concerned and the issues which are still outstanding in there. Two, in as far as the development of the roadmap to elections is concerned. The negotiators have now handed over all that to us and has said to us, now you need to escalate this to the principals. So the facilitator, we as a facilitation team and the facilitator, we're working on ensuring that the next meeting of the three principals plus the facilitator, we have a working meeting where we need to deal with the outstanding issues. Then the other process, obviously, is that of the constitution-making process, because we believe that that's an important issue. COPEC has got a timetable already. The next one is JOMIC. We have to continue to work with JOMIC, and we have worked with JOMIC quite well, I might say. I mean, in the last few months that we were working with JOMIC, really, we were having a lot of positive engagements with JOMIC. And particularly in working with JOMIC is about the creation of a conducive environment, because the conducive environment for us it's not about conducive environment during the elections. It's conducive environment even now as we speak. People must feel comfortable that they can be able to have their rallies, go to their meetings without the intimidation. And I think in the last 2 months or so, our engagement also with JOMIC has assisted to a point that even some of the principals have had to speak to each other and make certain statements of saying violence is not acceptable. Of course, we all know. It's one thing to say something, it's another to make sure that physically the parties also go down to speak to their members, their ordinary members, to make sure that there is no violence. The other issue which is of importance to us as a facilitation team is all the relevant institutions that you all know about, that we've been speaking about. The Electoral Commission, the Human Rights Commission, the Media Commission. We have continued to engage with them, and the last time when we were, not the last one but last, we met again with all those different institutions in a bid to ensure that we engage with them to say, ultimately, even those institutions like Electoral Commission, it's not just about the elections which are upcoming. It's about ensuring that you build these institutions even for the future, long time after the current situation has happened. Electoral Commission in each and every country is there because they have to make sure that the elections are properly protected. Human rights issue, it cannot be an issue just because of now. It's a long-term issue because ultimately the Zimbabwean people at some point need to feel the comfort that their rights are protected by the state, by the constitution, by any other relevant structures. And so we then also have to make sure that come the next SADC summit, we hope we will be able to report something much more substantial. But also as a closing, I just would like to say that somebody spoke about our focus, or the general focus, that we are focusing only on these issues of facilitation and we're not looking at all the other issues that are relevant to the development of Zimbabwe in general. The bottom line is, if you are not able to, as quickly as you possibly can, bring the situation to normalcy, the other issues are also very difficult to deal with. And therefore, what is important for the facilitator and the facilitation team is that we've been continuously and constantly pushing for the implementation of the global political agreement. We now have the roadmap to elections, even to get to that document which is now called the roadmap to elections with all its outstanding issues. We are pushing for the implementation of that. And we do have hope that this year will probably be a better year than the last year in Zimbabwe. And when I say so, I must not be misquoted to be saying that I'm saying there's going to be elections in Zimbabwe this year. It is not our decision as the facilitation team as to when the elections can take place in Zimbabwe. It depends entirely on the political parties. It also depends entirely on the people of Zimbabwe. But one thing we are certain about from where we stand as a facilitation team is that we have to make sure that the environment is conducive for holding elections. One, the institutions that are supposed to help us to make sure that the elections are free and fair are also in place. We are sure about the fact that SADC as a region has to be comfortable with the situation in Zimbabwe in order for SADC to be able to say, yes, as SADC, we feel that the elections can take place in Zimbabwe. But ultimately, at the end of it all, it is the political parties, the implementation of all the agreements that they've agreed upon, who can tell us when the elections are going to take place in Zimbabwe. We have done our best as a facilitation team to say through SADC, these are the things that the three political parties agreed upon. And SADC has to hold the political parties to those agreements. And SADC will keep on taking us back and making the statements, go back and deal with the outstanding issues, go back, and they're not taking anything which is outside. And it's human nature. You know, everyone in any given negotiation, everyone is looking to, it has been said, no, you know, the facilitation team is much more closer to Zanu-PF because they've got a historical background with Zanu-PF. That's a fact. We do have a historical background with Zanu-PF because this is the party that we always knew as the African National Congress. This is the party that we've gone up mountains and down mountains with. It's a fact, together with the ZAPU. Those are the parties that we have always known. But we've never said, just because we knew those parties, and I'm talking about us in the facilitation team, we've never said just because we've known these ones as our comrades, therefore we will compromise the negotiations process or the facilitation process. We're not going to do that. We are sticking with the principle that when we were given the responsibility as a facilitation team, we were told this is what you need to do. Implement the global political agreement. Hold each of the parties accountable for each and every aspect or element that they are responsible for. And that's what we're going to do at all times. Because for us it's important. If we begin to say, no, now we are going to listen to this one, the liberation struggle environment. It is now an environment where all of us are free, all of us are in government. What we want to do as Former Liberation Movement is to say, can we come together and have this discussion? Whatever is happening in each and every one of our countries, is it still fulfilling that we had agreed upon as Former Liberation Movements that we want to bring in our countries? And simple. It's the respect for human rights, to have constitution, to have the freedoms that people want, to make sure that there is development in the continent, to make sure that individual people in countries, they feel the comfort that they can be able to contribute to the well-being of their countries. There is just nothing else that is there except that. We've been refugees ourselves too. We are very, very conscious of the fact that none of these people must feel that they are being ill-treated in our country. We also know at the same time that having been refugees ourselves in the different countries, we did the best we could to make sure that the law of those countries, we do not go out and start doing things which we know that are completely unlawful in as far as the country is concerned. There's a rule of law in South Africa. We want to see exactly the same thing in the DRC or anywhere else. There must be respect for a rule of law. So in the South African context, the refugees, the people that came from the DRC, they were given an opportunity, they were allowed. I think from the very beginning, because the law says, and I know this as a matter of fact, because the law here in South Africa says, if you want to go out and have a demonstration, there are certain processes that you need to fulfill. You need to go and get the permission from the police. I'll make an example for you. When MDC started, at that time I used to live in where I already moved, but I know that the first rally that they had, they went and asked for permission from the police to march in Hillbrook. And I was requested to go and receive the memorandum from them. Nothing ever happened. They were there, they were in that little stadium there. I went and I addressed them, I received the memorandum, and I went away. It's a different story altogether. And by the way, those were people who were handing over a memorandum and saying, this is what we think needs to happen, but we're not going to see